All right, so going to Mars, this is when, from the ego's evolutionary point of view, as we've kind of been already talking about, Mars is, as you already know, or may already know, it's initiative, it's assertiveness, it's action, it's that willpower. It's probably, I would say, tied into the its sexuality rather than sensuality. It's very direct. Doesn't know. It doesn't. But it's also anger. It's related to anger, and how this ties into like the evolutionary humanity, which is where we've been, right? Because the sun is also fire. It rules Leo, so therefore it is. But Mars is not that kind of heat. Mars is a colder thing. Mars is a. If you look at the planet of Mars, its surface today has like ice. There's ice surfaces on it, and it's actually colder in Mars. Now it's not in that whole like equilibrium. What do you call that? The orbit of the Earth itself is it's within what's called the Goldilocks zone, and it's comfortable. It's a comfortable placement, right, for life to evolve, for life to flourish. With Mars, apparently it used to be also closer to the sun, and actually because of that thing I illustrated with the centrifugal force. With Mars is an older planet, right? That makes sense. Mars is an older planet than Earth, so Mars used to actually used to be colonized, or it used to have people in it. It used to I don't know what it was, but in long past, long millions, billions of years ago, I wouldn't be surprised if it's billions of years ago. But what happened was, eventually its force got further out of the sun, just like the moon right now. And its evolution around a revolution around the Earth, it actually was closer before to the planet, so the days were shorter, and now it's longer because the moon's orbit around the planet, around Earth, is going further and further away. And that's just natural process. It's just the way things are. When you go away from something, its gravitational pull against you is less farther away from it, goes farther away from you, which ties back into we could go back into the idea of the sun and in the ego, or the want, both the sun and the moon. We're kind of, the more we transition away from, and maybe this is more analogical than anything, analogous than anything, it's the fact that we're now kind of moving away from the ego, but still accepting the fact that it's like, oh, it exists, but we're kind of being more observant about it. So we're rising above that, right, and becoming more of that. So this is what we're heading towards. Now going back into Mars in terms of how it's still part of the evolutionary process, so that we kind of understand it a little bit more. Our inner Mars is not only that inner anger. I believe that inner Mars is our the reason, like, first of all, like, we have anger is because it's the part of it that it's actually a resisting force. When I say resisting force, it's a part of us, because anger is resistant to emotional processing. It's one of them, actually. And when I say resistance, I don't mean like opposite of it, but it can be as well. So resistance is the unacknowledgement of emotional processing. So it becomes like this, doesn't know how to deal with the emotions. This is why men tend to be the reactive tendencies, or rather reactive, what do you call this, mechanism of men tend to be towards more like anger, more than women in general. Of course, that's not always the case, right? Some men are actually more in touch with their feminine side. People say it's their feminine side. Gay men, even same thing. Right? Gay men are like, okay, some just get angry more than others. Now, in the past, of course, because we went through the whole age thing, right? We go into Venus into Mars, when self-value was kind of not processed. There was no self-worth. People sort of didn't know what, I believe that because Taurus also rules like good food, right? Moon and Taurus is kind of Cancer and Taurus are very similar in terms of like food. But I believe that farming got settled and more like stabilized during the age of Taurus. So that meant that it created more value, that development of like, this is what I value, right? The awareness of value in something, that this thing is what I worked hard for. This is my crop, right? So it rules farming. So Taurus is all about farming as well, because it represents leisure, it lends pleasure, it represents resources, and that's Venus. But going into Mars, how that would have happened, at least what I feel what would happen if I were to look at it as if I were the actual collective, I would see it be like, things got stolen from me. It was pretty common, started to become more common after the age of Taurus, I would say, because people started the value, and if you don't have your value, what happens? And if you can't manipulate, the Venus thing, if you can't manipulate your way into things, then what happens? Then you go for it, right? That because you're trying to assert your willpower onto other people. It's said that in traditional astrology that before the discovery of Pluto, therefore before the awareness of our inner Pluto, we had our inner Mars. So our Mars actually ruled part of the shadow stuff as well, but it was like embedded deep through like power control, power struggles. So when power struggles became the thing, just like when Venus was before the discovery of Neptune, which is the transcendence, our inner awareness of the possibility of transcending, human, mundane, false, or like simple, earthly, materialistic love, and also worth. So therefore, worth, value, pricing, these things. We had Venus that also ruled Libra, because the sign of Libra is Libra of love. Pluto, same thing. Before it became the ruler of Scorpio, it was Mars. That kind of, it ties in with that. But if we looked at the old ages, like the way it was in transitioning, if you look at what's called the bottom of the chart, or the natural wheel, these are all very like self-oriented energies. Leo all the way to what we're talking about now, to Aries, right? So it's very like, you can call it shallow. It's not really like that, but it's that energy of, I have this is mine, it's all for me. This is why even back then, even today, when we relate to other people, when we exert our willpower, it's like, what is it for me? What is it in for me? But once we start to awaken more and more and more and more, we start to go like, okay, I can still respect and honor what I need for myself. And at the same time, how that is part of the process of helping others also elevate. Like I said earlier, right? It's the third dimension, and the dimensions themselves are, and this makes sense to me what Matthias said, that it is perception, right? A perception of reality. So we evolved as we evolved from three dimension to fourth dimension, and eventually to fifth dimension and beyond, but we can't jump into those until we actually really go deep into what is it that's missing in the third. We can't go into the fourth and the fifth. Actually, right now, I believe that the experience we're going through now is the fourth dimension, generally speaking, because we need to step outside the confines of the time. The fourth dimension is timeless. So we need to step outside of that, because when you have time, when you have the constraints and beliefs of time, which is where we're going to go into after this, a little bit after this, which is Saturn, we have these fears. Let's go back to this. So this is part of the ego. When the ego is fearful, but it's part of the whole thing as well. Venus is a little bit of fear as well, because it doesn't know how to manipulate, doesn't know how to charm. Its value is kind of lost. So now it's like it's reasserting that solar energy, so to speak, solar thing, that sun energy of like helial energy. I don't know what to call it. The point is, right? Heliosolar. I don't know what to call it. The point is that it's now wanting to do something. It wants to do something different. It wants to start anew. The age of Aries, but when it was the idea of farming, the idea of like settlement, I think humanity started to get bored and wanted to like burst out into that, right? Mars is a burst of energy, just like Aries is. The thing with Aries is that once it's a burst of energy, it's destructive and that's it. Kaboom. It's explosion. Again, ties in with why Mars, the higher octave or higher vibration of Mars is Pluto. Pluto rules volcanoes, so it's an explosion. But of course, back then, Mars was representing all that. It still does, because it rules wars, Mars wars, accidents, hospitals because of accidents, weaponry. So in the age of Aries, a lot of weapons started to be developed. It came from this idea when the Earth was being harvested for its rocks and minerals to create tools for farming. They discovered it, right? So that there was a discovery of those things. But that also tied in again with self-worth. But then now it's like almost like the self-worth has either it felt kind of dull. I don't have self-worth. I don't know where I'm going, or how do we go from here? Where do we go? So it's almost like Aries provided that sort of, almost like a transition, almost like a renewal. Like we got to do something different, but it came from a place of, for the most part, I would say, especially for those who were unable to process their emotions, that it's like conquering and control. So lands were being controlled by the people who worked hard for them, of the people who worked hard for them. Freudian slip. It could be also that, it started with farmers going against farmers, and I'm not saying that is the intention of people, but I wouldn't be surprised that that's part of the evolutionary process that we had to go through in order to understand where we are now. So again, Mars was that whole thing where it's just like, I need to conquer, I need to control, I need to assert my willpower, I just need to be in control of this. So you do the farm. So then slavery became a thing. This is natural. This is not natural, but I mean, this is what happened. Right? You see it in past history now. We have documents on it showing, slavery was quite common. So Mars was this thing. Our inner Mars is that thing. It can go dark because we're not acknowledging what that anger is. Right? So we have to go deep into that. It's easy to go into like, it's initiative. I have initiative, and that's I have leadership qualities. Blah blah blah. All those things. I'm independent. I'm self-sufficient. That's fine. What it's harder to do is to embrace the shadow of our inner Mars and say, why do I feel that way? What am I angry about? Right? You go deep into it and you allow for that anger to come through physically. Mars also rules the body overall and health as well. The first house also rules the head and the genital area. So sexuality as well. So rape wasn't uncommon. Pillaging wasn't uncommon. right? Because it's an exertion of power. I don't have power, so I must take it off of you. This is, I believe, I wouldn't say starting point, but people started to develop narcissistic tendencies, which is kind of still tied into where the sun is, of course. But it became, I would say, I would speculate that it got amplified in Mars. And when we're talking about Mars is where we focus a lot of our energies in. So it's a lot of intensity as well. Again, before Pluto, which is intensity, there was Mars. But because Mars is more of a burst of energy rather than a long-term, like, really long-term sort of energy, or of that, it was an exertion. It was an assertion of power, but it was still a burst of energy. Again, like explosions, it rules explosions, all those things. So yeah, so wars, explosions, those kind of things. But again, the shadow of all of these things is because we haven't been able to deal with what we're angry about. Because what is anger but a resistance, right? Anger is a resistance to what is. That if we see something, we see a grass, why would we be angry at the grass that we're walking on? There really is no reason, right? But some people might be angry because it's like, oh, it's muddy. Okay. But it's muddy because of the natural cycles of the planet, right? Seasons. There's rain, it's muddy. The choice we make to walk on that muddy grass. That's just the reality. But the ego rationalizes, and then part of that is the anger thing. I mean, putting aside the other planets before that, like Venus, this part of the ego is Mars. This part of the ego is that whole, like, I don't want to accept it. I must fight it. I must kill it. I must be aggressive. It's a resistance. It's a higher resistance probably than the other planets, possibly. But any time of resistance is resistance, no matter the degree. So, going from Mars into Jupiter, which is now the part of us that wants to go beyond that. Jupiter was the ruler of Pisces before Neptune. But because behind the scenes, these other planets that were not discovered, that doesn't mean they never were there. We wasn't part of our awareness. So as we evolve as humans, even animals, other animals, we start to realize, like, oh, wait a second. All that destruction has to be resolved. But here's the thing, right? We've forgotten that we can go through the process of absolution, which is about Pisces, which is more a Neptune thing, through acknowledging that. But Jupiter, because even though it was the main ruler back then, Neptune itself is the main ruler now of Pisces, the age of Pisces. Jupiter is like that. There's a tendency also for Sagittarius to just do something else. So in a way, it's tied into Pisces, where it's like, I'm going to escape, right? So back then it was the age of Pisces, last 2,000 years that we were just in, subduing things. Instead of going through a natural absolution stage or absolutionary sort of process, we didn't have that. We didn't know. We weren't aware. We didn't have those tools. So what happened? Suppression. Pisces rules jails, prisons, places of reflections. Isolation is part of that as well. But because it carried on the other energies from the previous age, and it's also because of the ego, control became the thing as well. But Jupiter is all more about control than anything. It probably was stronger. Since the discovery of Neptune, there's that underlying possibility of unconditional love But Jupiter was the dominant uh, energy in the age of Pisces. There's still the dominant ego itself, right? Because from Leo, but with Jupiter there being at the forefront of the past 2,000 something years, Jupiter, because Jupiter rules organized religions, doctrine, dogma, you name it. Right? So it was in a way that was kind of twisted because it wasn't, the Jupiter is also about expansion, optimism. It was a planet considered a planet of like the luck and joy and all that stuff. Jovial, like the word Jove is the other name for Jupiter. So that's why when you say the word jovial means like fun, youthful. But that can be twisted because of the previous experiences of trauma, historical trauma, generational trauma, collective generational historical passed on trauma. Jupiter has been corrupted in that case. Our inner Jupiter doesn't no longer knows how to be benefic, so to speak. We don't know how to be self-benevolent, self-appreciating from Venus, self-accepting. That's a gift of Mars as well. Mars can be accepting by allowing what is, still having initiative, and saying, okay, I'm going to do the initiative and take action, do the action in terms of what needs to do to heal. But we didn't have that. Now we do. And Jupiter can be the same thing. Our inner optimistic side, but not over-optimism and realistic and saying, what is it that needs to be healed? Right? So there's faith as well. But again, back 2,000 years, for the past 2,000 years, it was like twisted. Faith has become egoic, an egoic belief. It's become religion or organized. Doctrine, basically the key word is doctrine. It's a dogmatic faith rather than, how can that be? It's like saying, I believe you if you give me money. I believe you if we're going to be friends. I believe you if it benefits me. So you see how there's a corruption behind it? You see how it's twisted, it's manipulated, it's narcissistic, it's corrupted. Right? Faith became like that. And as we evolve into now, which is now going to be the age of Aquarius, it's a Saturn-ruled sign as well. But it's also Uranus. Uranus is the main ruler. So what I would say is what's probably going to happen is that with Saturn creates limits, right? But there's a reason why we have those limits. It's because it tells us to not only process things, but saying, stop going too optimistic. Be more realistic. What's been happening is like, there's the collective, it's collective factor, right? It's all about the masses. That's his Uranus, right? But Saturn is also about the masses. But so it can go either way. There's like the desire for change, the desire for revolution, the desire for upheavals, the desire for these sort of like, turning things upside down. So that way, if you look at the planet of Uranus, its rings are going this way rather than this way. But that doesn't make it different? No. Right? Uranus is this way, meaning it creates awareness. It also ties in Kundalini energy, which is like basically awakening to life, because Kundalini energy is life. It's life itself, which we all are. But in order for us to go get there, we have to address what's here first. Does that make sense? You see the symbolism I'm using, right? So Saturn is actually also about faith. Trusting that the process we go through has a purpose. It has a reason. It has this is why Saturn is called the teacher. But the fears, Saturn also rules fears and limitations. But when we give into those things and see it as like a fear, instead of using the word fear as like, okay, I have this fear. Why do I have this fear? How do I feel about this fear? Why is there? Because fear means like, here's the border. You ever come across any sort of border, any sort of like the end of the road, and you feel like there's no path to take. Where am I going? You create your own path, right? Isn't that what we're being taught? Like in the age of Pisces before, which is it's a very like oscillating sign. It also likes to be, and Pisces has the energy of like, tell me what to do because I totally trust in you, unconditionally. There's a Neptune thing, right? There's the underlying thing, but the Jupiter in it is like, I don't know how to be explorative anymore. I don't know how to trust in myself and be optimistic. So you do it for me. That's the age of Pisces. Go into this now, the age of Aquarius, like the Saturn thing, and telling us it's carried over that whole like fear, like, oh, things have to be done for me. I don't know how to pave the road. Oh, I'm stuck here. How do I do this? How do I do this? And this is why now there's that underlying thing, but it's no longer it's not no longer an underlying thing. It can be, but most likely it's coming to the surface. And this is why Uranus is shaking things up, because it's like saying, wake the fuck up, right? Wake the fuck up. Like, wake up, okay? And Uranus is where we do the weird things that are weird. It can also be extreme, but it can only feel extreme if we haven't been open to practicing, at the very least, that mindfulness thing that people have talked about for decades. Because it's kind of like rising above that. But it doesn't, but what's happening, there's people who have risen above many things, but they've also risen above what needs to be healed. We've risen above, like, so that means we're escaping. So we're kind of carrying forward the delusions of the age of Pisces, which is escapism. We're going to escape towards spirituality. And then there's also the egoic part. We're going to be like righteous about it. This is going to be the new religion. We're going to be so right about this one. If you're not awakened, then fuck you. Seriously? Right? So right? It's no longer the collective. It's egoic collectiveness. It's egoic humility. That doesn't make sense. You can't have, that's not humility. That's false humility. Right? So it's, when we're awake towards these things, it's not something that's going to fall out of the sky and be like, I'm going to wait for awareness. I'm going to wait for humility. I'm going to wait for change. I'm going to wait till someone paves the road for me. I'm going to wait till... And the thing is, because the other energy that comes from the age of Pisces is idealism. When we idealize something so much, we jump the gun and we go from here to there. We're bypassing the process itself. We're not being present. Right? So that's the whole thing. That's the process of it. Right? So when we go into where we are right now with Saturn, the Chiron is coming forward now as well. As you probably saw in the last eclipse, Chiron is conjunct Eris and Mercury, but Chiron is coming through right now as kind of through our awareness. Chiron is it's an asteroid, it's a centaur on astronomy. By the way, it's a smaller body, but that doesn't make it less potent. This is not about small or large. You see what I mean? There's that duality. Which Uranus is going to break apart. Uranus is going to make that shit crumble. It's like hard shit. And, right? So we have to look at things from a whole perspective, that there is a duality, but it's not one or the other. That there exists the light and the dark. And this is why at the start, why there's Uranus, is the lawbreaker, is the earth shaker, because it has two ruling planets. What does that say? To me, that says acceptance and awareness of duality. Acceptance actually comes through more like Pisces. Pisces now has two ruling planets as well. It's acceptance of the duality, that you can have faith, but you can also have belief that it's like there's more than that, meaning like love itself. So both work together, right? Same with Scorpio, Mars, Pluto. The realistic approach, the inner core processing shadow of anger, power struggles, willpower, abuse, misuse, sexuality. Need I go on? Right? So Chiron is bringing that forward. I think Chiron is a beautiful thing that's happening, because if we work through our collective individually first and then collective wounding, really work on it, like really work on it, look for help, talk to people, relate. And this is the age of Aquarius we're in, right? It's about the collective. But part of this can be twisted as well. Part of this is going to be manipulated by the unhealthy ego, where it's going to go, no, there's only going to be egoic. There's going to be my collective. There's going to be only my awareness, or our awareness, not yours. It's exclusive. It's exclusivity in anything Aquarian. There's a potential for that, but it's a choice. But it goes through, for sure, something something going deep into that. You can call it shadow work or not, but part of shadow work, the essence of shadow work, is to look at our dark side and then see it as, for me personally, I've seen it as like, what is it telling me, right? How do I heal from that? What are the gifts behind it? When I say what are the gifts behind it, especially now, is not to say just looking at the positive, but how can it help me to grow now? But it's still, the gifts. So for example, like, I would say, if I were pointing at someone, oh, that person's such a cunt. Pardon the usage of that word, but when you say that, it's like, that's such a fag. It can be triggering for many people. Such an asshole. Right there, you're telling me you're the cunt, you're the fag, you're the asshole. You're also that. But we don't want to accept that. Oh, such a pedophile. You're a pedophile. That's what it is. It's a mirroring. Okay? In shadow work, it's actually funny because it started. It's kind of, you see how it's like with the Venus thing? The Venus is interesting in that case as well. But the point is that the shadow part of things is that we look at that and see, well, we go deeper into that concept, and how does that feel? You ask yourself, how does that feel? What does it mean? The shadow work I've done is like through more like verbal stuff I've written, like, why did I get triggered with the word faggot? Because back then, I didn't change the story. I just went with the story that faggot meant worthless, little, or rather, not worthy of living, abomination, evil, all those things that were conditioned. But when we look at words, right, words can be hurtful, but we can revise those so that the words eventually will have no effect, because now the words have a different meaning for us. Now this kind of ties in with Neville Goddard, or what Aaron Dowdy was talking about when it comes to revision process. He talks about revising it, something like that. I'll link the video below. So, it's part of the whole process that Chiron is bringing us through. But we look into the other planets, and now we have Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, even Eris. All 4 planets are actually, including Chiron, actually all 5 planets are bringing in the truth in terms of like what we used to believe. Right now, Uranus is going to be big this year, and it's actually going to be big starting like in about 7 days, 7 days from now, maybe. But the Uranus is like one of the game changers in us, but our inner Uranus is like, in order for us, not so much, it's not the outcome we should look at. The reason we get shocked at some things is because we're asleep. But when we're used to this is the gift of trauma. You see what I mean? This is the gift of the inflexibility, but you can say inflexibility, but the feel that we have to be inflexible, the feel that we have to resist. There's a gift behind the experience we have that caused that, which is traumatic experiences. It's like right? But what we have to do is address it, acknowledge it, work with it, and then train the body or retrain the body physically to accept those traumas. This is why I do the Wim Hof method all the time, because it's trained me to deal with that. I'm not saying it's perfect. It doesn't have to be. But it is a learning process. You'd be like, you get the hit of the cold water and you're just like, the part of you wants to resist. But the more you do it, it's like training your body. I guess you can call it like a resistance muscle, right? You're training those resistance muscle to be less resistant by going into that resistant energy. You're facing it. You're facing the cold so that you don't get cold. And that's the other thing too. It's literally like, it's literal. I face the cold so I don't get colds. I haven't gotten a cold for like 4 years. I get sniffles here and there, but that's it. Isn't that awesome? Something simple as that. So it means that this is part of the shock of Uranus, the acceptance of Neptune, the realistic imposition that is, to deal with unhealthy habits of Pluto, and the daringness of Eris to see the truth behind all of it. You see that? How the planets make sense in everyday life? And Chiron is that whole like bringing up the wounding, because if we don't work on our wounding, sometimes it's easier to just say, I'm going to work on myself by just doing this, but I think it's time to do more than just writing journals, meditation, all those things. I think it's time to do, I would say, all of them, and see. It's kind of like building your own ammunition, your own healing ammunition, so to speak, right? And really trying to, the goal is not to heal, the goal is to accept it with compassion, empathy, and understanding, so that it becomes easier as we get older. Because in reality, energy never dies. Your form dies, but not energy. It's just transferred. So what does that say? I would say that's just amazing. It's fucking amazing. It's like, it gives you an opportunity to shine. And then now it's almost like this, it's like that line from Santa Clarita Diet. She said, it's like seeing black and white and then turns to color. All of a sudden you see, not necessarily with the eyes, but there's an opening, right? And this actually ties in a lot with Uranus. The Chiron is the one that transitions from the fear and the delusions of the past into the openness. But the whole process is this kind of a cycle thing, right? Which is funny because as it all revolves around the sun, I believe that represents possibly also literally the cycle itself of reality. Like literally all the planets orbiting the sun. And it all revolves around the ego to be telling us, like, you need to be healthy again. You need to be healthy again. Through the moon, to the Mercury, through Venus, your own inner moon, your inner. Basically, the sun is already ego. It's your inner, But really going deep into that and really processing all that stuff. So your inner moon, your inner Mercury, inner Venus, inner Mars, inner Jupiter, inner Saturn, inner Chiron, inner Uranus, inner Neptune, inner Pluto, inner Eris, inner everything, all of it. Inner Sedna. Right? So, I'm going to end it here because I'm kind of not wiped out, just enough. It's enough for today. So I hope that gives you a perspective on like how to see yourself. Not, you don't have to necessarily rely on the terminologies and see it as like, because it's fun to sometimes do that. It's like, ooh, the sun, it's magical, right? But the moment it becomes like, something like saying something like, oh, I'm a Taurus, and this is my personality, then it becomes, there's a potential for it to become, into that separation. You want to see it as a whole, right? This is why in what astrology that really helps is looking at things as a whole, always as a whole. Right? Light, dark, up, down, left, right, inside, out. Right? Form, formless. You cannot work on separately. Each one separately. You cannot do that. It doesn't work. It's destructive. It's unhealthy. It's separation. That's really what it is. So, I hope that helps you guys. I hope that's informative at the very least. Thank you for watching.